really a great honor and a privilege to be here today at Samayach. I feel home from home. It's a Samayach in Johannesburg that I've been associated when I first came there many years ago, and I feel very at home here in Samayach. And I really want to thank Rav Yaakov Lubau and Ruvain Geffen and Samayach for hosting us. A very special afternoon we have here with Dr. Mordechai Soroka. It's about an incredible book. When I first read it, I've read quite a few books on the story of the Mirrer. I've never read a book like this. It's absolutely, there just are no words to describe how the research, it took Dr. Soroka 20 years to do the book, and each page is like a masterpiece. It really is. The work that went into it, but not only that, the story about, which we're going to hear today about Dr. Soroka's father, Reb Shmuel Chaim, it's Jewish history. You actually will be witnessing Jewish history from the son of Reb Shmuel Chaim. So without further ado, I want to call on our guest speaker, and I really want to thank Samayach. Thank you so much for hosting us today.
I'd like to begin by saying that this should be Ilu Nishmas, my father. As a matter of fact, his yahrzeit was just 2 days ago, and I was unable to be at his kever in New York, but I went just a few blocks from here for my father's father, Shmuel Birmel from Mirrer Yeshiva, Rabban Kalmanovitz, and Shaga Moshe Kalmanovitz. They're all over here in the Kvarim in Sanhedria. I first of all want to apologize because I'm going to go very, very quickly, because if I really wanted to tell you the whole story, it would take several hours. And what I'm going to be doing is just giving you the highlights in terms of what happened. My father was born in Kamenetz, the Tufts. He learned in Kamenetz. He learned his father, in fact, was a Malabed in Kamenetz. My father learned with Rabbi Chanan and Baranovich Yeshiva, and then he went to the Mirrer Yeshiva. You will see that he had gone with the yeshiva through to Vilna, to Kovna. Then they went to Moscow. From Moscow, they went to Kobe, Japan, to Shanghai, China. And most of the Mirrer Yeshiva they stayed in Shanghai, China for the duration of the war. My father and two other Bachrim had a somewhat different story, which really is unique, and you'll see exactly what transpired. The 1930s and 1940s was decades of upheaval in the world, but we'll see that everything was really orchestrated by Kadosh Baruch Hu, and there's teaching voice that happened to select Chichidim and to the entire 300 Talmidim in the Mirrer Yeshiva. It was a time when the yeshiva, Bachrim people were running. There was no place to run. Countries refused them entering. There was quotas to America and other countries. Britain didn't allow any Jews to come to then what was called Palestine, and there was confusion throughout the world. But we know that there were some events, and we know that there's no such thing as coincidences. Hashem is constantly involved in terms of running the world, and you'll see there were things that happened that enabled the yeshiva and Yechidim to survive the Holocaust. We'll also see that this era was such that governments turned their sides to against Klal Yisrael, especially the Yidden in Europe. We know what Germany did. We know that Japan was involved with the war, but even the United States turned its back towards Klal Yisrael. In the United States specifically, there were quota systems. Immigration was really prevented. That did not allow Jews to come to the United States. They were restrictive immigration laws that really could have saved millions and hundreds of thousands of people, but unfortunately they were denied visas and they were denied the ability to come into the United States. As you just see from here, the drop in terms of immigration, those are the years right before World War II and during the war, whereby the United States really restricted and prevented people from coming into the United States. Yet one yeshiva in its entirety survived, and that was the Mirrer Yeshiva. We know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu always provides the refuah before the makkah. You will see that this is true in terms of yeshiva, especially in terms of what transpired in terms of my father's survival during the war. In fact, my father had an uncle who came to the United States in 1906, 30 years before the war, and he was running away from Tsarist Russia. He didn't want to go into the Tsar's army. He came to the United States in 1907, and he was instrumental in terms of obtaining a visa, an American visa for my father. So 30 years later, he was one of the Yechidim who helped pave the way to my father's coming to the United States. There were Yechidim who were involved in terms of survival. There were governments that were totally against helping immigration. And we're talking about specifically the State Department of the American government, where they provided obstacles in terms of enabling Jews to survive the Holocaust. Here you have some Yechidim, Sugahara, who was a Japanese consul, Rabbi Avram Kamarovitz, who worked tirelessly in terms of saving the yeshiva, Zarach Warf Haftig, who was a Polish individual who he dedicated his life to helping refugees in terms of saving people. Now, most people are familiar about the genocide, the Holocaust, in terms of the concentration camps in Poland, in Germany, but there were other camps as well where Jews were victims, and we'll see that the Japanese, in fact, imprisoned hundreds of thousands of people, tens of thousands of people within prisoner of war camps within the Far East. And it was this area where my father was imprisoned as a captive of the Japanese within Manila. How he got to Manila is part of the story. Now, there's a major difference in terms of what happened in terms of the German concentration camps, the Polish concentration camps. Those were directed specifically in terms of the Jews, whereas in the Far East, the prisoner of war camps were not directly directed at Jews, but it was all individuals who belonged to countries who were not who were at war with Japan. But the brutality, the numbers of fatalities in these prisoner of war camps was unparalleled. The Japanese were unfortunately known during this era to act without any hint of humanity in terms of those who were imprisoned by the Japanese. Well, this is my father's father, my grandfather, who I never knew. He wrote a letter to my father right before the war, and it told him that I'm happy you're with the yeshiva. I only hope that if you have any questions, ask your rebbeim, get your hadracha from the yeshiva. And he was, it was a letter that he realized that it was going to be the very last time that he was going to be seeing my father. My father traveled from Kamenetz, where he was born, to Baranovich, to Mirrer, to Vilna, to Kovno. Later on, the yeshiva had to leave Kovno. He went to Kedanya, and eventually they were able to leave Lithuania and go to Moscow to Kobe, Japan. It's important to realize that in all these places where my father was, and throughout Europe, entire communities were killed by the Nazis. Kamenetz, where my father was born, the Germans came there in 1941, and those who weren't killed immediately were sent to ghettos, and those who were in the ghettos were eventually sent to the concentration camps. Every place where they went, the Kamenetz ghetto was liquidated. But how did the yeshiva survive? If we take a look at what transpired, it's mind-boggling. Vilna was a city which was between Poland and Lithuania. If you know the history of Vilna, it was a time where the Russians took over Vilna, then Poland took it over, and there was this battle between Poland and Lithuania in terms of where Vilna would be situated. In any case, Poland was far more powerful than Lithuania, and they made them build a railway between Kovno and Vilna, which by itself doesn't mean anything, but we'll see because of this railway, because of this ability to go from Kovno to Vilna, this was enabled the yeshiva and really thousands of individuals to be saved during the war. Also, they made sure that there had to be diplomatic relations between Kovno and Poland, Vilna, and this also enabled the ability of the yeshiva students to obtain very important documents and able to survive. It's interesting that there was this pact, a treaty between Germany and the Soviets, and these were traditionally two governments which hated each other. And what happened was they had a treaty, and they said, listen, we're not going to attack each other. And not only that, what they did was they divided up Poland. The east side of Poland was given to Russia, the west side was given to Germany. And if you understand the fact that here you have from one side the Germans and the Russians on the other side, and Mirrer Yeshiva, which was in Poland, was in a vise because there was no way for them to escape both of these governments which were intent to eradicate Judaism. When they made this treaty, there was a mind-boggling event that they said that Vilna is no longer part of Poland and it's going to be part of Lithuania. And by doing that, it took a city, Vilna, put it into an independent country. Now there was only two cities, Kovno and Vilna, that were really freed at this point in time, both from the Germans and the Russians. And because of that, thousands of Polish Jews tried to leave Poland and get to Vilna because at that point in time, they felt that they would be far more safer in Vilna because it was independent. Mirrer Yeshiva saw what was happening, and the whole yeshiva in its entirety left Mirrer Yeshiva, the city of Mir. They went to Vilna back in January in October of '39, and there was a time that even in Vilna they had to leave. They had to go to yeshiva was broken into 4 groups. My father was one of the groups that went to Kedanya. Unfortunately, Mirrer Yeshiva, as they left, the city of Mir was overrun by the Germans later on, and the Nazis killed everybody in Mir. 15,000 Jews get into Vilna. This was a point in time where other yeshivas, students from other yeshivas, came to Vilna because that was at that point in time the only haven for Jews. My father, I have some documentations from him from Vilna, where he registered as a refugee, like everybody else over there, and the American Joint Distribution Committee, the JDC, they enabled and helped set up soup kitchens and shelters for the yeshiva. Here's my father's papers from Mirrer Yeshiva when he was in Kedanya. How these papers survived, I don't know, but Baruch Hashem, we have them. And here's a list of all the members who registered with the committee. In any case, after a while, the borders were sealed. People who wanted to get to Vilna and Lithuania weren't able to. At this point in time, all of Europe was sealed and under the control of the Nazis and Russians. The clock was ticking. People were trying to get out of Europe. There was nowhere to go, and the British certainly did not allow people to go to Palestine or to Eretz Yisrael at that point in time.
Into England?
No, you couldn't even go to England. England also had quotas in terms of immigration. Kovno, where they were, was also destroyed and killed. People were sent first into the ghettos and taken out, and they were slaughtered by the Nazis. Same thing in terms of Vilna. When the Germans took over in June of '41, they were also killed. And unfortunately, Kedanya, Mirrer, Kamenetz, Baranovich, all these places became Yud and Rhein. Now, the fact that people were able to go into Lithuania, there were 15,000 Polish refugees who were able to get there. Of that, about 6,000 were ultimately saved. 2,500 came to Eretz Yisrael. Others went to Japan and Shanghai, and we'll see what happened. Now, to get out of Europe, you need a number of documents. You had to have a passport. Many of the Mirrer Yeshiva Bachrim did not have passports to show that they were Polish citizens. This was a time where there was upheaval. Documents, you could not go to an office to get documents because these cities and communities were destroyed. Even if you had a document, you had to get an entry visa to go to another country. You just could not leave your country. If you're here in Eretz Yisrael, you just can't go to any country. You have to have a visa. You had to have a travel permit to go from one country to another country, even if you had a visa to go to another country. And these things were obstacles for most people. Forget about money, which was another issue, but you needed documents. In terms of the Mirrer Yeshiva Bachrim, many of them maybe they had birth certificates, but many of them had no documentation whatsoever. What was important, which I mentioned before, that there was you were able to travel from Vilna to Kovno, was important because two of the Mirrer Yeshiva Bachrim went to Kovno. There was you have to understand, when Poland was taken over by the Soviets and Germans, there was no independent Polish country. Nonetheless, Poland did have, within the British embassy in Kovno, some of the yeshiva boys went there and they were able to get documents showing that all 300 people, all the students and the rebbeim, were in fact Polish citizens, which was important because that was the first element to enable them to get papers to get out. And the British Council in charge of Polish affairs certified all the yeshiva students as being Polish citizens. Now, again, those individuals who were in Poland when the Soviets took over, since there was no more Poland, independent Poland, now they became automatically citizens of the Soviet Union. They couldn't go anywhere. It's only those Polish individuals who are out of Poland in Lithuania. They were right now stateless, and because of that, they did not have to they did not become automatically citizens of the Soviet Union or of Russia. They were given the opportunity to declare that they're Soviet citizens, but that option was up to them. Here's my father from the Mirrer Yeshiva, his Polish certificate. In any case, as countries were being overrun, embassies and consul offices were being closed, people didn't know what to go or what to do. So, initially, there was a student from the yeshiva on Nachum Tzvi Gutwerth. He was a Dutch citizen from Holland. He was in fact not a Mirrer Yeshiva student, he was a Telza student, and he approached another Dutchman who he became friendly with before, who was the honorary consul for Holland in Kovno itself. And he asked him, listen, I can't, I'm trapped over here, can I go to, he didn't want to go back to Holland, because Holland was already taken over by the Germans. But Holland had some colonies or islands in South America. So he said, can I get to these colonies and avoid being trapped by the Germans? And they told him that, you know what, to get into Curacao, which was a Dutch colony, you don't need a visa. You could just go there without a visa. And he asked him to give us a paper saying that I'm allowed to go to Curacao. Now, because he was a Dutch citizen, the council, in fact, said, all right, we'll give you the papers, but there was a qualification that to get into Curacao, even though you didn't need a visa, it needed the approval, the permission by the governor of the island. And he asked the council not to put that down. Don't write down, entry is dependent upon the approval of the governor of the island. Anyway, once he did that, they would try to see whether or not they would issue the same type of visa or document not only to those who were citizens of Holland, which were only maybe 2 or 3, but to all the yeshiva students of Mirrer Yeshiva. And that's in fact what they did. And then when people heard about this, Soroka Haftig, who was in the Polish Mizrahi, he was the leader of Polish refugees, he in fact asked Gutwerth if he could find out whether or not the Dutch ambassador and consul would issue this not only to a few Yechidim, but to everybody. And finally, they in fact approved it. And this allowed everybody, several thousand people, to get a visa saying that they could go to Curacao. All right? And it really was fictional because no one really in their mind realized that they could travel to Curacao, because you would have to go through all of Europe, through Asia to get to Venezuela, to Curacao. In any case, this was one of the key documents that they got. And again, it was important to show that no visa was required to enter Curacao. This enabled them to show that we have an end point where we are allowed to go. Once they had that, it's an interesting, Soroka Haftig asked the former governor of Curacao, had all these Jews come to the island, would the governor have allowed them to come in? And he said, absolutely not. So it was really a fiction, but it allowed the Yidden to show that we have an end point to go.
How was he in contact with him?
This was after the war.
Oh.
All right. Now, here you are in Vilna, and to travel, all the borders were closed. The only way to get out of Europe was going through Russia. All right. Here's Moscow, wherever it is. The students had to make a decision. They have a way to get, they have an endpoint, but you needed an exit visa, which meant you had to go to the Russian authorities and say, I want to leave Russia. Now this was a slap in the face to Russia, because Mother Russia says, why don't you want our citizenship? You are denying the validity of Russia, and you want to leave Russia, because we conquered right now all of Poland and Lithuania. So people realized that if they would ask for an exit visa, there's a good chance that they'll be sent to Siberia. There'll be a good chance that they'll be imprisoned. So people were afraid, even though they had this endpoint visa, to ask for permission to leave Russia. And in fact, many individuals who had visas to go to Curacao were reluctant to ask for permission because they felt that they would be sent to Siberia. Sugihara, who was a Japanese diplomat, he was based in Kovno. Now, when do you have an embassy in a country? You have an embassy in a country when there are citizens of that country there. If they're, for instance, in America, you have embassies of all countries because we have people from all over the world. Here in Eretz Yisrael, you have embassies and councils. Why? Because people are, first of all, there's commerce, there's trade, there's business between Israel and other countries. You have an embassy to take care of their citizens who are from outside. Now, it made no sense for Japan to have an embassy or an office in Kovno. There were absolutely no Japanese living in Kovno. Why have an embassy there? All right? If you have a Japanese person who's a visitor and gets hurt, the embassy tries to do something for you. But if there are no Japanese who are living in Kovno, why have an embassy there? There was no commerce between Japan and Kovno, which was Lithuania. More than that, you have to understand the Japanese and the Germans were really enemies. To have a presence in an area where they're not welcome was contrary to logic. Nonetheless, Sugihara was based there. Actually, he was supposed to report back to Japan in terms of the presence of the Germans and the Russians. He was, in essence, a spy, but he was based in there. Now, when people ask for a transit visa to another country, why would a country want to allow people to travel through their country? They're fearful that if people are traveling, maybe they're going to stay in that country. Maybe they're going to be a burden, a financial burden to that country. And Sugihara was really supposed to represent his country, Japan. And he was asked to help Jews in terms of recognizing that they have this endpoint to go in terms of Curacao. We just want to travel through Japan on our way to Curacao. He was really supposed to take a look whether or not those papers are legitimate. He knew they were not legitimate. Nonetheless, he decided to issue travel permits for the Jews who were going to be leaving Lithuania, going through Russia, going to Japan, on their presumably way to Curacao. As a matter of fact, he wrote, telegrammed his superiors in Tokyo, should I issue permits? They didn't respond, and they responded to the negative that he shouldn't, but nonetheless, he issued all these visas to some 2,000 individuals. They found out also that when a visa is issued to an individual, sometimes it could be used not just for that individual, but for families. So the numbers are far more in terms of what the numbers look like. Interestingly, the book just came out this past September. in terms of Zwart Pennick, who was the Dutch consul who enabled people to get these visas, and he was punished by his government. And it wasn't until recently that the Dutch recognized that he was involved in terms of rescue, and he was in fact honored. Same thing in terms of Sugihara. At the point in time after the war, because he did not listen to his government, he was dishonored. It wasn't until recently that the Japanese government recognized that he was really saving thousands of people, and he became honored after that. So here we are, someplace in the Caribbean, Curacao, fictitious area where all these Jews were supposed to travel. Sugihara, after the war, was dismissed from the diplomatic service because he did not listen to them, and unfortunately he died being unknown, really. Here's my father, his papers in terms of his name, where he received this transit visa from Sugihara. It's interesting, we just this morning went to visit Sally Garner. Quick story in terms of Sally. He lived in Kovna. Somehow his family, he met Sugihara, invited him to a Hanukkah party, and this is probably the first time that Sugihara met Jews, and he had this affinity to save Jews later on because he realized that if he would not give out these transit visas, they would all be killed in Europe. There was a point in time where the Japanese foreign minister orders Sugihara to stop issuing visas. Nonetheless, he continued and enabled the saving of thousands of individuals. The Russians said you either have to acquire Soviet citizenship. Once you did that, they wouldn't let you go out. They'll send you back to occupied Poland, and there was a fear that you'd be exiled to Siberia. So it was a call that people didn't know what to do. Should we accept Soviet citizenship? Should we deny it? Should we be asked to get out? And ultimately, there were those who said, no, let's take the gamble and try to get exit visas. Zerach or Haftig was instrumental in terms of getting the Soviets or the Soviet representatives in Lithuania to approve the exit visas. Now this was incredible. It made no sense. Why would the Soviets allow thousands of people to travel through Russia, to leave Russia? Nonetheless, they in fact granted all these individuals for their transit visas. Why it was done, historians aren't sure. They think maybe because the Lithuanians wanted to show that they were independent from Soviet Russia itself. Maybe they wanted the currency, the money from that individuals will pay for their exit visas. In any case, many of them did this, others didn't. Others who tried to get these exit visas later on were unable to because the Soviets decided that no, we're not granting any more. Later on, Zerach or Haftig became the Minister of Religion over here in Eretz Yisrael, but he in fact was instrumental in terms of enabling getting a lot of these Jewish refugees to get these papers to leave Europe. So, Hashem orchestrates everything. The Japanese Council, Sugihara was in place, the Dutch Council, and even the British Council, who in fact certified that all these hundreds and thousands of people were Polish citizens. Now, to travel from Lithuania and Poland, you had to go through Moscow. Moscow, you went to finally Vladivostok. It was 5,722 miles. This in itself is a story, but we don't have time for it. But again, the yeshiva came to Moscow. They had to wait for the next train, which was a 12-day journey to the end of Russia, which was, near the Far East. But this is how they traveled. Finally, when they came to Vladivostok, they took a boat, took them to Kobe, Japan. First actually went to Sugara, Japan. From there, they took another train to Kobe, Japan. The yeshiva stayed in Japan for several months. Ultimately, the Japanese said, we really gave you an exit visa, a travel visa, just for 10 days. We don't want you to remain here in Kobe, Japan. This was an area where they had military factories. Japan knew that they were going to go to war very soon, and they did not want foreigners to be based within Japan. So they said, all right, guys, you have to move to Shanghai, China, which Shanghai, China was controlled by the Japanese. So during this time when they first came to Kobe, Japan, my father arrived February 13th, 1941, and ultimately he stayed in Japan till about June, and then left with the whole yeshiva, and they went to Shanghai, China. Well, this is a story for most of the yeshiva. Most of the Mirrer yeshiva stayed in Shanghai, China for the duration of the war. Now, if you recall, I mentioned to you, here's something very interesting. Here's a permit to stay in Japan. It was really a 10-day permit. It was extended every month for another month, and it's dated over here, March 16th, 1915, or 15. I didn't understand, I said, this is 1940, 41. Why does it say 15? I said it probably is a mistake. I found a Japanese student, and I asked him to translate everything, and what it says is over here that these are Jewish refugees, and they should be they're escaping, and they should be having an extension in terms of their permits. But the 15, was a mystery to me. Anyway, this Japanese student told me that it's correct. It is the year 15. The Japanese, what they do is they count the years, the year corresponding to the years of the reign of the emperor. And this was the 15th year of the emperor, the Japanese emperor. And I said, you know what, in Rosh Hashanah, the Masechtas Rosh Hashanah talks about how we count the years, and as you know, we count the Malach, each king. We count the years in terms of how we count the years. We count it in terms of the Malachim, in terms of the kings, how they were their reigns, and it was very similar in terms of what the Japanese were doing. In any case,
I believe that ship that took them from Vladivostok to Japan, as soon as they disembarked, the whole ship sank.
Well, it wasn't just one ship. There were many voyages, and the last one, the story is that it broke up afterwards. There was the seas were very rough and overcrowded, and they said it was a nest that they survived, and that was the last journey of one of the ships there. Here are some postcards that my father sent to communists from Kobe, Japan. People didn't realize that in Europe things were over already. Nonetheless, they would send letters and postcards. There were many people who were left in Vilna, in Kovna, who tried to get the Curacao visas, who tried to get exit visas, and transit visas, and it was already too late. Unfortunately, they all were killed. Well, to get a visa to come to the United States, you had to go through a whole process. There were papers you had to show that you were not a financial burden to the United States. You had to show that that you were not a criminal. You have to understand, the United States imposed a new regulation saying that people who are trying to get visas to come to America, they would ask you, well, do you have family who are still in Germany, family who's still in Poland? And if you answered yes, they would automatically invalidate your application. They'll say that, yeah, you're going to come to the United States, and if you still have family in Europe, then the Germans are going to try to get you to become a spy, because they'll threaten your family in those countries. It was incredible in terms of the new regulations that were imposed in terms of everybody. I'm going to go very quickly and just tell you what happened afterwards. So the yeshiva was in Shanghai for the duration of the war. This in itself is interesting in terms of the yeshiva itself. Where is it? Here was a building that was constructed in the early 1900s in a commercial area in Shanghai. It was really hardly ever used. But when the Mirrer yeshiva came there, it sat 300 Talmidim from the yeshiva. And this is my father over here in the yeshiva in Shanghai, China. Well, like I said, my father had an uncle in America who finally got him an American visa. So when he was leaving, he had all his colleagues, the Talmidim from the yeshiva. He wrote down all the names from everyone from the Mirrer yeshiva, because he didn't know when he's going to see them, if all of them would receive them alive. And he wrote all this down. Some Bachman signed their names on a postcard. And he had permission to leave Shanghai, China, to the United States. The first available boat that was available to them. Oh, why did Japan allow people to stay in Kobe, Japan? Why did Japan allow them to stay in Shanghai? So there are numerous books talking about why the Japanese allowed this. You have to understand, there was a Russo-Japanese war in the beginning of the 19th century where Jacob Schiff was an American banker here in New York, and he gave money to the Japanese government to finance the war against Russia. Also, there was this belief that Jews controlled the world. Now, the Russians, the Germans said, no, Jews are controlling the world, let's kill them out. The Japanese said, no, the Jews control the world, we could harness their power to our advantage. And this was part of the Fugu plan, where they felt that if we get the Jews on our side, they will convince the American government to be pro-Japanese. So it's an interesting why the Japanese allowed this to continue. This is one of the experts of Japan who in fact translated the Particles of the Elders of Zion, whereby he said the Jews control the world, let's use them to our advantage. In any case, my father was able to get his visa. The first visa opportunity to leave Shanghai, China happened to have been on Shabbos. So he said, no, I'm not going to leave on Shabbos, I'll take the next boat. The next boat was on December 4th, 1941. And he and two of his friends left on December 1941 on their way to America. Now, what happened December 7th, 1941? All right, Pearl Harbor. Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, sneak attack, and America declared war on the Japanese government. Well, what happened was My father left Shanghai, China. He was in Manila Bay within the Philippines on December 7th, 1941. When the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, they bombed Manila. America had a number of military bases, a naval base in Manila, and they bombed Manila. His boat was hit, wasn't sunk yet, but he was able to get to shore, and he was now stuck in Manila. There was a small Jewish community in Manila. Interesting, Manila used to be a commonwealth of the United States. There was a war between the Philippines and the United States in 1898. The Philippines lost. America took over the Philippines as a territory. And as a result of that, there was a small community of Jews, secular Jews in Manila. What they did is they saw that some Jews were trying to escape Germany, and they said, listen, let's try to get some refugees into Manila. Fortunately, the immigration policies of the Philippines did not have to replicate the immigration policies of the United States. There were no quotas in terms of refugees. So there were several Jews, the Freeler brothers, who convinced the president of the Philippines to, in fact, try to bring refugees to the Philippines. And there was a small Jewish community in the Philippines. Well, to make a long story short, when my father was there, he was in Manila. There was a German family by the name of Hirschalt. They were Orthodox, they were frum, and my father went to them and was able to stay with them and get kosher food. 3 weeks later, the Japanese invades the Philippines. They invade the Philippines and they take over the Philippine Islands. Anyone who was not a Filipino, anyone who was who came from a country at war with Japan, was put into a prisoner of war camp. So my father and his two other Bachrim, they were in fact incarcerated, imprisoned by the Japanese in a POW camp. The first camp that they were put into was called Santa Thomas internment camp. Santa Thomas was a Catholic university, which they converted into a prison. And ultimately there were some 7,000 inmates within this prison. Interestingly, they were imprisoned, and the first Yom Kippur that came in 1942, there was an announcement in the camp, and they wanted some 40 people who were prisoners. All 40 people were Jews. And, you know, here you are being called, and everyone of the group was Jewish. They felt that they were going to kill them all out. Anyway, they assemble in front of the Japanese commandant, and they're fearful for their lives. And the Japanese commandant says, I know today is a holy day for you Jews. Today is Yom Kippur. I'm going to allow you folks to go to the shul. There was a shul in Manila for services. And first of all, they were just relieved that they weren't going to be killed. But more than that, most of the 40 agreed to go. But my father and the two other Bachrim knew it was Yom Kippur. You can't travel on Yom Kippur. So they refused, and they stayed in the camp. And they had they davened tefillos within the Catholic university. I guess it was the first time there was Yom Kippur services in a Catholic university. In any case, you have to understand, when Pearl Harbor was attacked, it was attacked, yes, it was a terrible thing. 2,400 people were killed. But there was no invasion. When Manila was attacked, thousands were killed. But then there was an invasion. And tens of thousands were put into prison. There was the Bataan, where 10,000 Americans were killed in terms of by the Japanese. So this was the first time where American territory, the Philippines was an American territory now taken over by the Japanese. People don't realize that American territory was in fact taken over by the Japanese. In any case, they were imprisoned. Unfortunately, they were penniless. The Japanese did not want to give them any food. And when the Japanese invades, it was the largest surrender of U.S. troops and the greatest loss of U.S. territory in American history. Anyway, at the Bataan Death March, 10,000 were killed, 20,000 died in the prisons over there. It wasn't exactly a picnic for them. There were only a few Jews within the camp, and my father was one of them, and this is the camp. But after it grew to some 7,000 inmates, the Japanese wanted to move people out, and they took 80 people and sent them further 40 miles from Manila to build a new prison camp within the jungles. And my father went there, and in fact, what was interesting, I didn't mention, maybe I did, that the Germans, German Jews who were in Manila were considered by the Japanese as allies, even though they were Jewish. But the Japanese saw them as Germans, and therefore they did not put them into prison. It was only people from other countries who were at war with Japan who were incarcerated. The Americans in the prison had their own, the Germans would not feed them, they had their own, they had to fend for themselves. I found some diaries whereby my father and the others tried to get the authorities, the American authorities, to let them take their food and cook it themselves because they could not have the food cooked by the Americans. It was trade. They were denied, so what little food that they did get, they traded with others to get some vegetables and some fruits. They kept as much as they can Shabbos, and what was interesting is they in fact created a calendar so they would know when Shabbos, when Yom Tovim were, what the Pasha Shavua was, Bahab was, and one of the Bachram was Matul Rabinowitz, and this was his calendar that he created while they were in prison. Evidently, Reb Chaim Shmulevitz from the Mirrer Shiva found out that they were stuck in Manila. He sent a letter to the Japanese to see if they could allow them to come back to Shanghai. Whether or not there was ever a response, we don't know, but in any case, they were not allowed to go back. They were on starvation diets, and things got worse. You have to know that my father, when he was finally liberated, he weighed only about 70 pounds. Many people died in the camps. Many got malaria, beriberi, and all types of dysentery, and they were dying left and right because they were on starvation diets. They were sent to another camp where I told you they were going to build Los Baños, and what happened over here is at one point in time these camps were governed by civilians from the Japanese government. Later on they were taken over by the military Japanese, and they were ruthless. And in other camps and prisons they were in fact killed out, and these are actual pictures of people who were inmates of these camps. I went down to the National Archives in Washington. This camp was such where It was in the boondocks. It was in areas where escape was fruitless because there was no place to go. An American went out, escaped. He went out to get food or barter with the natives to bring it back to the camp. And when he came back to the camp, he was shot, only wounded. The commandant went over to him, killed him, and shot him in the head. And after that, my father gave testimony to the war crimes tribunal after the war. Well, MacArthur comes back to the Philippines in 1944, in the fall of 1944, and there's a major battle in the Philippines for the Far East. They found out, American intelligence told them, that the Japanese intend to kill out all the prisoners in the camp. So, during the Battle of Manila, during this whole battle, they decide to take a rescue squad of paratroopers and a force of 300 people. They took them away from the front lines and they decided to go and try to save the inmates from this camp. And in fact, what happened was they diverted all these people. This is how the Manila looked as a result of the battles. But because of the massacre that was contemplated, and intelligence said this is going to happen, the Americans tried to rescue 2,000 people. And in fact, February 23rd, 1945, there was this rescue mission to rescue those at Los Baños. Interestingly, when they came, they found out that the Japanese do calisthenics at 7 o'clock, exactly at 7 o'clock in the morning, without their guns, and that was the time when they came, the paratroopers came, and the Americans killed everybody. 8 miles from the camp was several battalions of Japanese, and they had to get there out really quickly. They had intended to bring trucks to ship them out, but something happened to the trucks, and they had these amphibian vehicles which went through was able to go on the ocean as well as land, and they in fact evacuated everybody out of the camp. All of them were in fact saved. 2,146 was saved. In terms of casualty, this is one of the from people, Carl Juravel. He was also stuck in the camp, and he was saved with my father as well. Now, the reason why this was the biggest rescue operation in the annals of American military history, well, it was sort of dwarfed because that day, the same day that they rescued 2,000 people from Los Baños, the Americans also were victorious in Iwo Jima, and they had the famous flag that they had over there, and as a result of that, the news really didn't hit the papers as much in terms of the rescue. Well, after they were rescued, they were rehabilitated, they were taking care of the Americans, and they were put onto boats to come to the United States. What happened was, while they were on the boats to come to the United States, weeks after they were rescued, the Americans came onto the boat, the FBI, and asked everyone to show them the papers, who you are. Are you a citizen? Why should we let you come into the United States? And my father was asked to show his papers, and he showed his papers showing that he has an American visa. Well, the authority says, well, that visa expired 3.5 years ago. He says, yes, I know it expired, but I was a prisoner. And they said, we don't care. And they threw him off the boat, sent him back to Manila. As a matter of fact, unfortunately, there were Correspondence to American authorities, the Commission of Immigration. At first, there was one person from the Justice Department said that this was extenuating circumstances, that we should allow him to proceed because he didn't go because he was a prisoner. Unfortunately, the Commission of Immigration, whose own parents were immigrants to the United States, had the final say-so, and he, in fact, denied my father to come to the United States because his visa was expired. Well, unfortunately, he had to wait another year. He had to apply again. During that period of time, the shul in Manila was destroyed by the Japanese. It's the only American shul that was destroyed during World War II. Right? Because again, Manila was an American territory. Finally, he did get his visa, was approved, and he was always one step ahead of the Malka Mavis, and he was able to come to the United States. 3 years later, after he was able to get here, this is Rav Kamenovitz, who was the Masada Kedushin for my father. This is Max Simchowitz, or Mordechai Simchowitz, who was my father's uncle, who enabled him to come to the United States. And Baruch Hashem, as a result of the rescue of Mirrer Yeshiva, as a result of many individuals who made a difference, who showed that that you can save people. Today, Baruch Hashem, all my children have 7 sons. They're all in Kailo, all in yeshivas. Shmuel Beerbaum, my Rosh Yeshiva, my son Shlomo was a Talmud of his as well. Shlomo works for the Agudas Yisrael. I have children in Passaic and Cincinnati, in the Kailo over there, as well as Passaic, Taki Torma. I have another son who's a Rebbe there, and Chasdei Hashem, that the entire yeshiva was saved. My father was saved ultimately, and he was able to see the fruits of his existence, and that hopefully we're continuing in terms of the heritage of the yeshiva.
Why again did he leave Shanghai and go towards Manila? Why did he again leave Shanghai and go towards Manila?
He was coming to America.
Yeah, it was
Can you show the picture of the very nice picture with the circle around it.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Sitting with
Appreciate that. Incredible. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Over here,
yeah, that's it.
this is a Japanese official where the Rosh Mirrer Yeshiva is thanking him for saving Japanese people. Yeah.
That's our Russia over here.
So he was just in Japan.
No. They came here. They made a reception for them.
In New York?
No, here in
Yeah, in the Mirror. In the Mirror.
Wow. When was this?
a few years ago.
Really?
Here are the Bachram learning in Kobe, Japan.
You mentioned that you went to visit somebody this morning?
Yeah, Sally Ganner.
It's a little boy that asked for the invited to Gehorities home for Hanukkah.
Where does he live?
Ramat Sharon.
Ramat
Yeah,
Sharon.
he's in his 90s and he's
Genoa?
Genoa.
Genoa.
Yeah.
What is he asked for?
Appreciate coming, and I appreciate the fact that you're able to learn Torah. It's amazing. Just have to come down here, and guys, you can just come here and learn. You have to worry about malaria and dysentery.
That's really very, very moving.
Yeah, it was Makatz a lot because but the
Is it true that this shul that they were in Shanghai, that it got blown up immediately after the yeshiva
in
left it?
Shanghai?
Yeah.
No, no, it was made into
Didn't you tell that
There,
story?
there was a building. There was a building. A building.
The
Where they were
building. Is it still standing?
no.
So we heard that after the yeshiva, first of all,
No, I know what you're talking about. That was then, at the end of the war, Shanghai, China was being bombarded by
Right.
the Americans.
Right.
There was major battles in between the Japanese and the Americans. So that building has been still the only thing that's left in Shanghai. Ghetto's not there anymore. There's a small museum in that area, but nothing else.
You mentioned that the Japanese and the Germans were enemies.
No, what I said was, since the Japanese and the Germans were allies, so even though in Manila there were these 1,500 German Jews, they were Jews.
Right.
You would think that they would be put into,
Right.
but since the Japanese saw them not as Jews but as Germans, those
In one place you mentioned that the Germans and the Japanese were the enemy.
yeah, that was
Before they made it back.
but it's a pella that those American, the original Americans who lived in Manila, who helped bring in the Jews, refugees, they were put into prison. But the German refugees now were free. And in the beginning of the war, the German Jews were able to bring food to the Jews in prison.
The Hirschhausen now live in New York.
Yeah, Yasha Hirschhausen is an oncologist. So,
And he has a son here in Kiryat Sefer, I think. Used to teach here at Samayach. Remember Hirschhausen?
Who? Yes.
Hirschhausen.
pleasure. Thank you.
Used to be a ground.
He used to teach here.
Yeah.
Right? He lives in Kiryat Sefer today.
Right.
Shkoyach, thank you very much. It was really very illuminating. My father left the Mirrer Yeshiva
Huh?
before. My father was in the Mirrer Yeshiva, but he left in 1938. He went back to Germany
Oh, really?
to try to save his family. His mother was a widow.
Yeah.
And he also had Nissa with him. They didn't manage to get out until 1940.
There were a few Yechidim that were able to come to America from Kobe, Japan. As a matter of fact, Moshe Leib Levovitz, his father was Rabbi Yochanan. He and his wife were able to leave Kobe, Japan before the war in 1941.
Which they both
Yerucham Levovitz, their oldest son, she was pregnant when they were trying to leave. And they told her, if you let the Japanese know that you're pregnant, soon to have a baby, they're not going to let you go. So she said nothing. She didn't let it on. Anyway, she gave birth on a Japanese boat coming here. And by international law, if you were born on a Japanese or whatever vessel, you become a citizen. They wouldn't recognize him as a citizen. When I spoke to Yerucham, his birth certificate doesn't say Japan. It says the longitude and latitude of the coordinates of the ocean where he was born.
My father remained stateless for the rest of his life. He
Yeah.
didn't want to take on any other citizenship. This old Polish passport.
Well, that was, in a way, it was, it saved people because they were stateless. But again, it worked against some people who tried to get some people. I'm sorry, what was your last name?
Merrill.
Merrill? So your father ultimately moved to England?
Yeah.
Most of them either went to Eretz Yisrael or came to New York. Some came to Canada, some.
And he had left them earlier.
There were a group of Americans who were learning in the Mirrer Yeshiva. And in 1939, they were able to come back to the States.
Chaim Pinchas Scheinberg went to the Mirrer
Yeah.
Yeshiva, right?
I davened in the Mirrer Minyan in Borough Park. And most of them, all of them were Altamirs. But there were a few of the Americans who were in Europe, who were there also in Yeshua.
Ik kwam de goedslaars dat je mag.
God
Nice to meet you.
My pleasure.
Shkoyach.